Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I am absolutely delighted to have a very special guest with us today, Bryan Hubbard. Bryan has an extensive and versatile background as a journalist, editor, publisher, and he's the author of two books, including Time Light and The Untrue Story of You. He is also publisher and co-editor of the international magazine, What Doctors Don't Tell You, which is published in 9 countries. Before this, Bryan worked for the Financial Times Group and ran his own successful investment newspaper. Now, at the very core of time light therapy is the realization that time is energy. The past is an energy, and we're going to get to explore that even more today and really understand the power of thought and how your thoughts essentially create your reality. Now, I want to just clarify that time light therapy is not timeline therapy, which you may have heard about in other episodes. They're two different modalities, both very powerful. And so, Bryan, it is absolutely a pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vered, and thank you for providing the focus on time light therapy. Thank you, bless you for doing that. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And sometimes on this podcast, we start by asking our experts how they got to learn what they've learned, to do what they do. Would you be willing to share a little bit about your story?
Absolutely. Can I just first preface that by just giving a very quick resume of what time light therapy is, and then move into my own story and how it all came about, because I think it gives more relevance to it if I do it that way around, if that's okay. So
Yes.
thank you. Time light therapy is a spiritual therapy, and its ultimate aim is to get people back to their natural state. And their natural state, suspend disbelief for a moment, is a timeless one. And we actually do live in this all the time, but we flip in and out of it. But actually, timeless state is our natural state. And that timeless state is one where there's great awareness. You're aware of your thoughts all the time. You're aware of everything around you. You are super appreciative of this gift of life all the time. And you are completely open to creation, if you like. It's an extraordinary energetic position to be in, and it's one that is open to all of us to have. And yet, for most of us, we only get a scent of it, let alone bathe in it. So why is that? Why don't we always live in our natural state? And the reason is because of the past. Because past experiences, trauma, what you will, shout louder than the quiet voice of the present, if you will. And I think there are quite a few therapists that probably say this. And so now I'm going to take a wide dart to the left in this thick wood of the human psyche and talk about time light therapy and the differences. And the first and fundamental difference, as you rightly pointed out in your excellent intro, is that time itself is an energy. It is not a dimension. You cannot travel back or forward in time. Time is only an energy. And this is a very important insight. So what causes this energy to happen? Well, trauma causes it to happen. Trauma is the genesis, or the big bang, if you will, of time. So when you are a child and you suffer a trauma, and I use the term very loosely, psychiatrists use trauma. And I think that trauma can be a different thing for a different person. It's not always, it doesn't have to be on the furthest scale of childhood abuse or anything else. It can be whatever it takes for you to rupture the sense of unity that we have with very small children. Small children have no sense of division. And that sort of slowly starts to happen with experience. And when that sense of division starts to appear in our psyche, so too does time. And time begins at that rupture when we cease to be unified with our mother, with the world, or what you will, when we suddenly realize, goodness, this world is hostile and angry, and I'm different from that. Okay? And that's when time starts. So that's the first big difference from other therapies. The other big difference, well, loads of differences, but we might get around to a few of them. But the other real key difference is that there is absolutely no difference between, let's say, for example, you suffer a trauma as a small child, and as a result of that, you become anxious, say. And as a result of that, you find it difficult to go out, you can't see friends, you don't embrace life, right? You're anxious. Now, time-light therapy contends there is absolutely no difference between the issue and yourself. So conventional therapy has it that there's me who is somehow separate from anxiety. So therefore, I seek therapy in order to be rid of the anxiety, or whatever it is, anger, you name it. Yeah. Time-light contends there is absolutely no difference at all between the anxiety and the you that is suffering the anxiety. They are one and the same thing. And so when you see that, it's actually quite empowering, because you have thousands of selves all created by a different trauma and different experiences, all claiming to own this thing. But in fact, this you that owns the thing is a fiction. And when you really do see that, the chance of radical transformation becomes possible, because you're not working on it anymore. The fundamental shift is that you start working on your relationship with time. And when you work on that, everything else falls into place eventually, outside of time. So that's, I just wanted to give that as a very brief resume, most of which will mean nothing to the people listening to this and thinking, my God, what is he talking about? It takes a while for this stuff to sink in. But I wanted to say that because now I'll tell you about, well, how did I come by this? Well, I suffered abuse as a small child. It was not sexual abuse, it was emotional abuse. And for 7 years, my father never spoke to me at all. And instead, to communicate with me, he would whistle. And I tell the joke, and hope you don't mind, as it's a joke at my expense. Whenever I hear someone whistling, I salivate and want a biscuit. But that's not true. But so for 7 years, I had this abuse. And you know, the funny thing about it, and I'm not speaking to many abused kids, but I didn't see anything odd about it. To me, it wasn't, I assumed that's how everyone is brought up. I assumed that's how life was. But I really went into adulthood lacking any confidence, trying to go for a job. All this was utterly impossible for me. And I didn't understand why. And I was very fortunate to meet an amazing lady called Lynn McTaggart, who many of you will know for her work on intention, power of 8, and so forth. And she even married me. And she helped me to see that the abuse I'd suffered as a child was the cause of my lack of confidence as an adult. And it was quite extreme, actually, Barrett. I couldn't, for example, go and buy a pair of trousers. I didn't really feel I had the value, had worth to buy anything for myself. It's quite weird, but that was my feeling. So intellectually, I got it. I understood, I can now see what my father's abuse has made me what I am. It made absolutely no difference at all to my life. And from that, in fact, I went on to suffer chronic depression. And it was a pretty dark place to be. Anyone who's suffered from depression will know that. And people say, you're so brave to say you had a mental illness. And I always feel like it's not a mental illness. There's so many people who have depression, and I feel it's okay to talk about that, So anyway, I suffered from depression. And then, but I had the intellect to say, I don't want to be depressed. I wasn't that dumb, but I didn't know what to do about it. And I tried a few therapies. And it didn't really cut through. I wasn't finding any improvement. And I knew, because my work with what doctors don't tell you, and I knew about the chemical imbalance theory of depression, and we know it's not true. Even psychiatrists walk away from that now. So, and it's interesting, to this day, people don't know what depression is. They try and treat it, but they don't know what it is, and that's fascinating. If it's not a chemical imbalance, what's depression? They don't know. But anyway, so a few things happened to me. The first thing happened to me was when I went to see my father when he was dying. He was on his deathbed. And he'd always been a really fit man, and he'd had a medical checkup, and his heart was really strong. In fact, they said you have the heart of someone 20 years younger, and that sort of thing. And we sort of made our peace, I suppose, in those intervening years as when I became an adult. An uneasy peace, but it was a peace. But there he was in his bed, and I said, "What's wrong with you?" Because there was never anything wrong with him. And he said, "I've really had enough. I just want to die." And I guess that's true of a lot of very old people. He was about 91. And I think that's true of a lot of very old people. They just suddenly feel, you know what, I've had enough. I've had enough of being alive. And I sort of took it, I said, yeah, right. But it was on the Sunday, Wednesday, my mother phoned and said, Dad's died. And I really thought, yeah, he really did have enough. And it never appears on the death certificate, But I really do feel that's sort of true. And it sort of, I didn't know what to make of that, but I just thought, you sort of willed your death, and you've given up, which is very interesting. So that was, so okay, park that. A few years later, there I was, and I really had reached a crisis point with my depression, and Lynn was away, and I was in the house on my own. This house, in fact, same house. And I, looking through the bookshelves, and I found this book on ghosts. And I don't know why I picked it out. I don't have a particular interest in ghosts, and I wasn't really sure if I even believed in ghosts, but nonetheless I did. Yeah, it was written by quite a important Canadian academic, a man called Ian Stevenson, who had almost sort of risked his whole academic career by studying this subject. And it was a fascinating book. And what's it called? I was talking about immortality. Intimations of Immortality. It was a Wordsworth poem, same title. Anyway, so I started reading this book, and what's so fascinating was that case after case was about someone who died and yet had unfinished business, and they were trying to get a message back to the living. And it was quite weird. I mean, stuff, from funny stories to quite tragic stories, but people would say, oh, the missing will, and all this was in the top pocket, is in the top drawer of something, and they'd go to this top, and there it was, all this sort of stuff. And it just, I just put the book down, and I suddenly joined it with my own father dying. And I suddenly got it, that time was an energy, that my father had died from too much time. He was time heavy, the very reverse of what I want to get everyone to, just time life. He became time heavy. It had too much. And the ghost thing, whether you believe it or not, it's a powerful metaphor, is that people still sort of exist in time until something is finished. And I just thought, it just sort of came to me. And then I'll say something came into my head. It was like it was almost like the 11th commandment, which Moses didn't bring down because it was too heavy. And it hit me so hard. And I don't know where it came from. To this day, I do not know where it came from, but it was, that to which you do not fully attend shall weigh you down. And I thought, what the heck was that? And it was the most extraordinary thing. And then from that came tumbling out all this stuff about time. And we can talk about the time bodies and all this. And, and I think uppermost in our minds at the moment is Ukraine. And, and the time therapy, the time model does explain war. And we can talk about that as well, and why people go to war. It sort of explains that too. And yeah, so that was essentially the story. And then I spent about 4 or 5 years after those revelations working on it. My my academic side is philosophy. So I'm very good at attacking arguments, even my own. And so I spent years doing that and really working through what I'd understood that in about 15 minutes that afternoon. And I started to introduce it in workshops and refine it, improve it, till I got to a point where it was actually being used to help people. From that, I wrote, some books about it. So, yeah, that's pretty much the background story. That was a long answer to a short question. Sorry.
I loved hearing it, because I do believe that our past, and specifically those incomplete aspects of our being, do shape our current reality. And I've seen in my work as an executive coach that in order to more easily and more quickly achieve our goals, achieve a higher performance level, whatever we desire or intend for our future, we
Yeah.
can do that much more easily when we resolve, if you will, things from the past, which we might, as you said, loosely define as trauma. And of course, there's what we would call big T trauma, which is those things that, our life was, in our perception was in danger, or kind of little T traumas. But the idea is those moments which, many people in the field called UDIN moments. UDIN is, an acronym, right? UDIN, U being a moment that was unexpected. We did not expect it when it happened, whether we were little kids or later on in our life, right? The D stands for it was really dramatic. There was a lot of emotion, a lot of feeling
Right.
associated with
Right.
it,
Right.
a sense of threat or danger or potential
Yeah.
loss. The I standing for isolating, right? We were, in our perception,
Right.
alone. We were separate, as you kind of said,
You
right?
were suddenly separated. Right. Suddenly the world was different from myself and was a hostile place.
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
the N stands for we didn't have resources, we didn't have strategies, which is why I believe that when we can kind of go back, if you will, in our imagination and our consciousness to help those little parts of us to get those resources, those positive learnings that they didn't have, at the
Yeah.
time, because they couldn't
Yeah.
access that from their own vantage
Yeah.
point, then, and that's why they couldn't overcome the situation. When we go back and resolve that, then there is kind of an unburdening, if you will, that
Yeah.
helps us to create our best
That's
life.
so profound, because there's something that Lynn and I do in a workshop, which is retroactive intention, if you will, and I adopt that as well. But it's going back to a real key moment in your past, usually as a child, when you were not powerful, and it was quite a key thing. Like, you won't go to ballet lessons. I had the tights and they wouldn't let me go. No, but it can be a seminal moment. And going back to that, but as a powerful adult, and then being able to say what you really needed to say in that situation is so healing. And it's physically healing. I'll tell you one amazing story very quickly. We were in a workshop in San Francisco, and we did this. And it's sort of like a party piece, because you can only do it quickly, and and you don't expect a lot of feedback on it. But anyway, we did this. And this, we said, anyone got any reactions or anything to say? And this guy said, yeah, I do. He said, I can't remember what happened, but he was blocked by his mother from doing something he really wanted to do. I can't remember what it was. And he said, from the following day, he said, I developed vitiligo. Vitiligo is the loss of pigmentation in the skin. We suddenly have these really white blotches, right? So he started, as a small child, had vitiligo as what would appear to be a direct response to the blocking of something he wanted to do in his life, okay? So he says, anyway, so I went back to that moment as a powerful adult and said exactly what I wanted to say to my mother, which I couldn't say when I was 8 or whatever. And I said that thing to her. And you know what? My vitiligo is going. It was extraordinary. Right in front of his eyes and our eyes, we were watching the vitiligo disappear. And that's how powerful it is. That's how powerful it is. And, it's everything. It's everything, and it's, you talk about the Odin or whatever. I mean, the CDZ came up with things called ACEs, I don't know if you're adverse childhood experiences, right? Of which they list 17. And they can be anything from, you came home and from school and your mother was not there. That was considered to be an ACE. Now, there are 17 of those and go right the way through to full sexual intercourse with a parent, right? And they said they've done lots of studies, and there have been lots of studies. Anyone who's had 4 or more of these ACEs is like 4 times more likely to die prematurely, 3 times more likely to suffer from chronic health problems. So why can it be that something that happens to you when you're 5 give you a heart attack when you're 65, or give you cancer when you're 75? Why? And my contention is because the past itself is energetic. And the real key to it is as well, is that experience is as live today as it was when you were 5. It's as live today as when you were 5. And it's essential for your well-being, mental and physical well-being, that you understand this process that's happening in you and resolve it. Now, the one saving grace, one thing I truly believe is that what you'll see is, how do you know you have these ACEs, whatever you call it? One thing you'll see is a lot of patterning in your life, a lot of repeat patterns, same mistakes you'll make again and again and again. Why? Because the energy is doing this for you and determining your life. Now, why does it do this? And this to me is the saving grace. It does it because it wants to be understood. And I believe it's trying to end. Because I think there is something more powerful than that, and that is love. And that is the sense of unity. And it's trying to be exposed to that thing in us, this timeless thing in ourselves, to resolve itself. It doesn't want to exist. It wants to be resolved. And it is always coming forward. So what do we see? We see patterns in life. You'll see a situation in your life where it will flare up. This has happened to me before. I recognize this situation, and it'll come up. And as you rightly say, the process is this, it's emotional. Everything's entirely emotional. And it's lovely to think we're terribly intellectual and terribly logical, and we are none of those things. We're a complete sort of sea of emotion. That's all we are. And the mind comes in after the fact to try and make sense of emotion. But emotion comes first. The mind then makes sense of that emotion. But that emotion is still that incredible energy, this wave coming through you, which does create your life completely, every moment of every day. And, the only free person is the person who's free of the past. That's a free person. And if you're not free of the past, you're not free. It's as simple as that. But the great thing is that opportunity presents itself every moment, every day, to become free, to see that process, to understand that time is an energy, to understand that this self that has these issues is the problem. It's not that I have a problem. It is I and the problem are the same thing. And that's, as I say, I did repeat it, but it's worth repeating because it really needs to sink in. It's a really important discovery that and when you do see that, it's like you can be separate from it, because suddenly it's not I'm a bad person, I'm always angry. No. The anger has created a you that owns the anger. And you do sometimes see that. I don't know if you've ever been super angry, where they say you see red, right? And there is nothing but the anger. It's a very pure moment, but it's a dangerous moment, because in that moment it's pure anger. And then after the fact, you jump in and you say, oh, good goddess, what did I just say or do? And you either then vindicate the anger and make it worse, or you step back from the anger and say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. So the emotion came first, and only after that did it create a you that owned the anger. And normally you don't see that. Normally the energy is not so powerful like a major angry outburst where you can actually see the separation and then it comes out. Normally, the person who owns or takes possession of the anger comes out at the same moment, so you don't realize that they are one and the same thing. But I think that's an important thing. Could I just talk to you for a minute about the whole timeline model? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Because it's so important, because I mentioned the Ukraine, and I just feel like we're seeing such savagery and most appalling scenes we haven't seen since. No, I never saw them in the Second World War, but I believe they are, most terrible things. And I just felt like, what is war? Why do we have war? And the timeline model works like this, where there is you as present time, as now. Now, but the weird thing about that, and I just mentioned in passing, I don't want to deal with it, is it's everything. It's the stars and the elephants in the zoo and the carpet beneath your feet. And you are inside present time. Present time is, and so that's, the other part is the past time. Now, the past time is really important because there are three elements to past time. We've been speaking today about trauma and ACEs and what have you, and that all sits in psychological time, psychological past, they call it. But there are two other pasts. The one is called the knowledge past. Now, knowledge is actually a memory, right? So from anything like reading Euclid right down to tying your shoelaces takes memory, okay? I mean, if I suddenly don't know how to tie my shoelaces, I've lost the memory of how to do it. So that's a very important, so we call it the knowledge past. That's important. But the third past is the narrative past. And that is your story. That's about who I am, where I was brought up, and where I was brought up, and what my name is, all of which is relatively true, but not really true. And when the narrative past fuses with the psychological past, that is the place of hostility and conflict. Because suddenly you have a memory of who you are and a psychological memory of what happened. And when those two come together, that is the spark for a lot of violence, a lot of war, all the rest of it. I mean, the present self can be violent because it's like an animal self. It needs basic things and will defend itself, but it's done with, and it's a response to a threat. And once the threat has passed, it will disappear. The psychological past is an extension of all these things in time. So for example, what are the basic needs of the human being? Well, we need shelter. Now, the psychological past would take that through time and say, no, you need a mansion. We need to eat, we need to have food. The psychological past will extend and say, no, you must have gourmet food. The present time says we need to have sex, we need to procreate. The psychological past says, no, we'll turn that into pornography. So all these things are extensions from in the past, which extend through. And when you fuse the psychological past with the narrative past, that is a fusion through time of conflict. And that is the home. Now, because when we started, I said, well, the purpose of time-like therapy is to get everyone to their natural state, which is a timeless state. People who live in a timeless state don't have conflict, and they don't go to war. They can still shout at you and still stamp on your foot if you stamp on their foot, but they won't go to war because there is not the extension any longer. And although I haven't forgotten all the things that happened to me as a child, they have no power over me. And so I am master of my past. It does not master me. And so all these things that might have happened to people has no power over them. That narrative past has no power over them, nor does the psychological past have a power over them, where they just blindly go to war and do the most horrendous and terrible things to another human being. And I just wanted to say that because I just think, we're all freaked about what we're watching. And I don't know if the story is true, but I hear, people say, well, since time was recorded, man's been at war. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's probably not far off that always there's been conflict in the world. And you think, well, why is that? And, it is the fusion of these paths that are the reason for that. And the final part of the model, which is by far the best part of the model, is the potential self, which is the timeless self. Now, if you confuse the potential with the present, your life becomes so fulfilled, so creative, you're in such control, you don't suffer from great stress. Because I know a lot of your listeners are top executives who spend their lives being stressed out. I know I interviewed loads of them in the past. My heart goes out to these guys and ladies. They work far too hard, and they don't have that perspective, which is so important for sanity and good health. They're not allowed to have that. So you have to find it for yourself. And by finding the timeless self, which does exist, guys, I know you may not believe it, it exists. We are timeless beings with the present. The potential with the present is the place of saints. It's the place where you can be as a totally creative, happy, joyous human being. And it's all to do with the vibrations that come from every center. And the trouble is, the psychological past is like an enormously large trumpet. And the potential center is like a little piccolo. And you have to be very quiet. Be still and know that I am God. You have to be very quiet to realize the potential center, this timeless self is there. And the whole trombone and trumpet section, but you can only do that when you realize that it's running you. And only then can it be quieter. So anyway, we've rambled, Vered, all over the place, rugged terrain, and anyway, I hope that's interesting.
It is absolutely fascinating, Bryan. And what I know for sure, as you said earlier, is that when we go inward and connect with these deeper parts of us in a very compassionate, curious way, kind of like being in the essence of that potential self, if you will, then we can gain the understanding of why those parts of us are behaving the way they are.
Yeah.
Because what we know about trauma is that all of the details of those Uden moments, those traumatic events, essentially get frozen in our nervous system with the physical sensations, with the, as you shared in the example of the gentleman with the skin condition.
Vitiligo, yeah.
Thank you. Or, we freeze the kind of extreme emotions that we have, and those can get stored in the body, very dense, low frequency energy, and also the extreme beliefs. So when we gain that understanding, we give those resources and strategies to those parts of us, then those protector parts, that need to protect those more vulnerable parts that were frozen in time can kind of step away. And what happens is that then we change the narrative. As you said, the narrative self changes, the meaning that we give to that event changes because we can see some positive learning, some new resources from that. And then there's that fusing, as you called it, with the psychological past. And that is, as you said, when we are truly free, when we are able to liberate those frozen in time parts of us, so they can go play, because they're like little ones, right, inside of us. And then then at that point, can we truly be free and bring more focus and attention to that potential self, right? To dial up the volume, if you will,
right.
Those parts of us, so that we can more deliberately focus our energy and collapse all possibilities in the quantum, field, if you will, all those potentials into physical matter. And so would you be willing, maybe just for another few minutes, to help our listeners really understand the power of thought?
Sure. Well, as I say, the thought is secondary to the emotion. The emotion rises up from a past experience, And invariably is an identification. It's a recognition of something. And so the emotion will rise up again, possibly in anticipation, because if it is, for me, the trauma was such that the world was hostile, and I felt I was always had to defend or not engage at all. So, I couldn't trust anyone to feel deeply for them because I knew I was going to be hurt, so I wouldn't do it. And it's all energy, Verity. You say thought. Yes, it is thought eventually, but if you say it slightly, I try to sort of put it slightly differently, if that's okay, but it is just energetic time, which will be interpreted first as emotion, then as thought. And, these thoughts do loom very large. We have no real understanding of the extraordinary power of thought, because it is your translation of the world. And because of the potential self, which is outside of time, but is completely creative, but it's amoral. It doesn't care what you give it. If you say the world is a cruel place where making money is hard or whatever it might be, yeah, that's what they'll give you. That doesn't care. That's up to you. That was your input, and that is the output. And it is hard for people to fathom the power of their thinking. It's beyond almost beyond their understanding. So much so, well, the Catholics got it, didn't they? If you thought about something, it was as bad as doing it, right? They got that, didn't they? You still had to do 3 Hail Marys if you wanted to do something bad. It was as bad as doing it. So they got that, and but people, it takes a lot of reflection to really examine those assumptions that you have about yourself and your life, and just say, well, where does it come from? Where do you think that idea comes from? You could challenge any thought. And it's one of my exercises is just say, okay, now we know the different time selves that you have. Where did that thought come from? And where from that, within that time self, did that thought come from? Why did you have it? And so on and so forth. And very often it does come from trauma. It does come from a bad experience, but it can come from any experience, really. But it's a prejudice, and we live with them. We're surrounded by these prejudices. We have a view about something, and it's okay, but it's okay to say, well, blue's my favorite color. Well, that's fine. But, some stuff isn't okay. And you do have to just inwardly reflect on that, whether it's through meditation or whatever. But, and I say, well, what I try to do is give people a landscape of the human psyche. So if you got that in front of you, say, okay, well, I get this now. I can see this is where this came from here, and this is how I'm made up now. If you got that map, you can then start saying, no, I can sort of plot this and understand why I have these views. And, they always say, if you want to know your inner state, look at your outer state. Yeah, it's the same thing. There is absolutely no difference. And there's no difference anyway, because as I said, with the present time, you are within present time. It's not that, so it really is that whatever you're feeling is created out there as well. And it's so powerful there. And people feel, here's a number of assumptions people have, all of which are untrue. They think, for example, that they are an independent, free-thinking agency. That is not true. They think there is a world outside utterly separate from them. That is not true. They think that the world is a hostile, competitive place and they must fight for every scrap. That is not true. And so any number of assumptions that we live by are not true, but we live by them. And, and if you can examine these things, it makes a heck of a difference. And it means you probably don't fall over with a heart attack, right? That's pretty cool. But more important than that, life is an extraordinary gift. We can't even begin to understand this gift that we've been given. We can't comprehend the beauty of this life, even with all the terrible things that happen in it. It is utterly beautiful gift, beyond your comprehension. But we don't see it. We walk around with our heads on the ground and worrying about this, that, and the other, because worry is an expression of time. Every projection you have about, well, what's going to happen tomorrow is obviously a projection of time. And it's all false. I mean, I don't know about you, but if you've ever had a fear about something's going to happen, it never happens like that. Even something mundane, like I've got to go to the dentist, and I'm really freaking out about going to the dentist because you fear it's going to be a terrible experience. And every time you go, it isn't, it's okay. It was fine. I got through it. I didn't die. It was okay. But we project this, and we project things through time, which are all false. It's all false. And it's all driven by the past. If you didn't have a past, you wouldn't have this projection happen. It actually does stop because you've woken up, you've become aware. And that grip stops, and you now, Eckhart Tolle, the power of now. So I call my stuff the power of how, because most people have got no clue how to do the now bit, right? And but you're right, Vered. People, you say about the power of thought. I got no idea at all how powerful it is. Everything around you is result of your thoughts, and your physical health is the result of your thoughts. It really is. I mean, as I say, I mentioned earlier about these ACEs, 4 times more likely to get chronic. Do you know, I mean, I was reading this guy who's a psychiatrist, there's people who suffer from trauma, and you're absolutely right. The single biggest factor of trauma is freezing. I cannot function. I cannot go into the world as a normal, stable human being and survive properly. I cannot do it. I'm frozen, right? But he's found that people who have trauma, the actual parts of their brain have a different shape. So powerful is this force, so powerful is this energy. The physical chambers of the brain have changed shape. So don't tell me it's not an energy. It's an energy, okay? And that's come right from the past. Yeah, and it can be healed. But that's the other thing I learned from what doctors don't tell you is everything can be healed. The human body's capacity for healing is phenomenal. And if you've got a misshapen brain, which I must have had, it's gone back into normal shape now, Vered. It's all good. It's hard to really, in an hour, really go very deeply with this. There's so much to say, but I hope it's given people a bit of a flavor, and just to think, just look at every assumption that you have and question it. And more to the point, ask yourself, where did it come from? And especially if you see the world as dangerous, hostile, competitive, difficult, again, ask yourself where that comes. Those would have probably come from a trauma somewhere. Very low. I don't use the term trauma, by the way. I call them THEs. I call them time-heavy experiences, because it starts the creation of time. And so, because as I said, your trauma can be so many different things to different people. If you're a particular sensitive soul, as I say, coming home and your mother's not there is traumatic. Whereas for somebody else, it's neither here nor there. We're all, so I don't like to use the term trauma. I mean, I'll quote one. I'm not a Freudian by any means. I don't believe hardly anything he said. But one thing he did say, which I thought was absolutely brilliant, he was looking at a traumatized patient. He said, "Gentlemen, I think this man is suffering from memories." And that's it. I thought, well done. That's true.
Wow. I 100% believe in that.
Yeah.
I'm certain that that is true. And some of those memories or burdens are our own from this life, if you will, and some are legacy burdens that were
That's another side
never
we
stopped
never touched
growing.
on, very, but that's further evidence of the energetic nature of time. That, we found loads of cases of whether it's alcoholism, gambling, you name it, going back through many generations. And stories of concentration camp victims. The grandchildren suffer from chronic health problems far more than a normal family would, but who didn't suffer the concentration camps. It passes through the generations. And I think that's the other thing, the important thing about understanding thought and madness of conflict. And my challenge is, when's it going to stop? And are you the one who's going to stop it? Because no one else can. Only you can do it. Only you can become aware of this past and end it. No one else can do it. So are you up for that challenge? It's all right to give to Ukraine, and which we all do. But who's going to end the conflict? Who's going to end conflict full stop? At what point do we say that's enough? It ends, the madness of my family ends with me, and it ends now. Because I'm not going to have my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren go through the same nonsense that my predecessors went through, and right through the generations.
That's right. You have the power
We have the power and the responsibility.
Patterns
And the responsibility there.
That's right. I absolutely agree that that is true. It starts with us taking responsibility for our own energy, and in doing so, raising the frequency of our own bodies, radiating a different frequency out into the field, thereby accelerating not only our own evolution, but that of the collective. And we know that from science that it is absolutely possible. We can reprogram, rewire those old baselines. And we do that through the power of the heart. There's much research out of the Institute of Heart Math that proves that. And of course, many, many modalities that help people to do so, many of which are presented on this podcast as time light therapy. So, Bryan, with a heart full of gratitude for you for following that impulse to reach for that book, to be curious, to play with this concept, to practice this concept, to test it out. I know it's also being tested very successfully with a group of European psychiatrists working with, the most severe mental health patients and seeing some extraordinary results. This works. And so I'm so deeply grateful that you are doing this work, staying focused on it, sharing it with the world, because we can heal and we can create a different future for ourselves and our planet. How can people learn?
Amen to that. Amen to that.
Amen to that. How can people learn even more about you, about your research, your work, and of course, time light therapy?
Okay, thank you. Well, there is the book. I wrote it several years ago, Untrue Story of You, still available in very few bookshops, but very available on Amazon still, and all the rest of that. And my website is called time-light.co.uk, because I'm in England, so there you are, co.uk. And, I work closely with Lynn, my wife, and we do a whole bunch of stuff together. She has to let me, because I carry the suitcases. And but we're doing a workshop this September in Yorkshire, England. And so check that out on Lynn's site as well, Lynn McTaggart, L-Y-N-N-E McTaggart, MCTAGGART.com. Look her up, look up this workshop. We'll be working together on that. So that's a good enough place to start. And people, I think it's just, it's a sort of thing where you just have to hang around a bit and let it sink in and spend time and ask questions and go for walks and stuff like that. And, because it's a lot it's a bit like opening your mouth to a fire hydrant, it's just, wow, that's way too much. But we had to do that today. We had to go through a lot of ground to cover that. But Just would encourage people just to think about some of these things and try to look at them in their lives and reflect on this. And if the urge is there, and to listen to this tape again or whatever, and just take it in. And yeah, there's so much that people can do, and I really do urge them to do it, because if I wake up, it changes everything, not just for me. And that's the great responsibility. Okay.
And I am very hopeful that through conversations like the ones we're doing today, all of the work that you, Lynn, and others are doing in our world, that we can shape the future.
If I just reach out and say the amazing work you're doing as well, and it's so we travel together in this path of awakening, and it's a journey that has no end. Yeah,
that's right. We never cease to grow and to evolve.
No,
and
that's
for that,
true.
I am grateful, and I'm grateful to you. Thank you.
God bless you. We're all grateful to you, Barry. Thank you so much.